everybody. I'm so glad that SOPA has the wisdom to give women journalists this platform to share their expertise and experience with you tonight. Let's give SOPA a hand. I was told that we have about 25 minutes, so I'll be very brief in my introduction. Their bios are in the book, and they are all very accomplished journalists, and also women journalists. We have Beech on my far right there, Time magazine. She is a Times East Asia correspondent and China bureau chief. She covers politics, conflicts, culture, diplomacy, and others. And then next to her, we're Phorn. She's editor-at-large for the Cambodia Daily, Cambodia's leading newspaper. She says her interest is investigative reporting. And we have Didi, Tatlow. She's a correspondent for the international news, New York Times in Beijing. And I'm surprised she was born in Hong Kong. I was very impressed. And then we have Kate O'Keefe. She's a Wall Street Journal's global gambling reporter. Very interesting. She's based in Hong Kong, and she's covered the Beech for the past few years. We'll hear from her. And among them, they have traveled to dozens of countries. They've won multiple awards. And so I'll start with Hannah. Does being a woman affect the way you do journalism? You cover SARS, you cover Burma, or Myanmar, the monks, the killing monks, right? I remember that covers picture in Time magazine, and for that, you were blocked from entering Lima, or Yangon, for a conference on press freedom.
Ironically, I was the only member of the press who was not allowed to attend a conference on media freedom, which I guess was a good perspective, was probably something I'm proud of, but perhaps not the Burmese government side.
But for this occasion, tell us, being a woman, being a mother of two, how does it affect you doing your journalism?
I'm going to do something which I hate as a journalist, which is to flip your question. I've been trying to sort of self-reflect about the way that I approach journalism and whether I use gender as a prism to look at people. And I must admit that I do. So on the one hand, yes, people look at female journalists differently, but I as a female journalist cover things differently because I look at people in a different way. So for instance, a couple years ago, 2010, when Aung San Suu Kyi, who's the Burmese democracy leader, when she was released from house arrest, or her latest stint of house arrest, I went to meet with her, and it was sort of back in the day when you could actually have long conversations with her. And we talked about classical music. She liked Bach better than Mozart. We had a 20-minute conversation about that. We talked about the fact that she secretly liked the Beatles but didn't really want to admit it. And we also talked about the issue of her family. And oftentimes when people talk about Aung San Suu Kyi, they mention that she in some ways was so committed to the Burmese democracy movement that her husband died when she was under house arrest. Her two children, her two sons, initially grew up without a mother for many years. And I have two small boys, and I personally thought, would I be able to make that kind of sacrifice? Not that I'm an American Democratic leader, and I've never been in that position, but I just thought, is this, I really want to know what her perspective on it was. And it was the one question in a probably 3-hour conversation where she kind of bristled. And I realized that it's a question. If I've been lucky enough to cover Nelson Mandela emerging from Robben Island after 27 years, I don't think very many journalists would have gone to him and said, so how do you feel about missing your kid's childhood? The prism through which we look at female political leaders is very different. But at the same time, you look at the female political leadership positions, current prime ministers, former prime ministers, and I can't think of a single one who is not related to somebody whose husband or father or somebody in their family has some sort of proximity to power. So whether it's Korea, megawatts, in Thailand until very recently. These are all women who were there because initially the springboard was family power. They become political people in their own right. But that's a reality in female politics in Asian politics in Asia. And I think we as journalists, I don't know whether we fall into the trap exactly, but it's something that we have to reflect in our coverage.
You got asked a question to Bopha. You work in Cambodia, and you said in the newsroom, men is still very much the majority. So what's the challenge of being a woman reporter in Cambodia?
Now, I'm not sure if female journalists here have the same problem, especially those who are single. Now the problem that I'm facing every day is like teasing from my colleagues that I'm still single because I sacrifice most of my time for my job and having feeling from the family, like parents and brothers and sisters, keep pushing you, getting married, but it's hard. And I was thinking whether I choose I love journalism, that's why I become a journalist, and that's why I've been doing my job like for 8 years until now. So every now and then I've been thinking whether I should, abandon my life, my personal life, over the job, or the job over my personal life. But today, after we have lunch together, all of us, and this to encourage me, and I realized that I can have both. My curious as a journalist, and also maybe a mother in the future. I'm not sure about that. But I would say I would choose my career over my husband if that's my choice. So every now and then, I don't know, because it's in Hong Kong, it's more like country in Europe or country like in the States. So I'm sure that the culture is quite similar. And because Cambodia, unlike the other countries, our neighboring countries, for example, Vietnam, Thailand, even Malaysia, Indonesia, and the other countries that they have like so lots of female journalists. Cambodia is like, I think, maybe 20% of journalists are female. For example, in newsroom, we only have my other colleagues, my other colleagues and I, and among the group, Cambodian reporters. So I guess the same thing in other occupations. And also, female are involved so much in the kind of investigations that you have a lot of impact if you're doing it right and you're doing it correctly. So yeah, those are the challenges.
Okay, we'll get that. Now, Didi, you wrote quite a bit, actually a lot, on women in China. And you have this series in the New York Times called the Female Factor.
Yeah, that was originally in the International Herald Tribune. It's now not happening anymore in quite the same way.
Okay, but you did contribute to quite a number of stories.
Yeah.
And you want to share your observation of covering women in China, the status of women in China,
I mean, I think it's a hugely interesting issue because it is, after all, 1 in 12 people in the world is a Chinese woman. I think that's probably about right. And there are so many vital things to think about. One of the ironies of China is that in 1995, the UN 4th conference, World Conference on Women took place in Beijing, and I was there as a rookie reporter, where they came out with this fabulous declaration, which was historic, where they actually stated that women's rights are human rights and vice versa. And this really was the first time that the issue of women and their status in society, their ability to earn, their ability to have a career, to have anything, to escape violence, for example, was really spelled out in quite that way. So despite all the human rights issues that are pressing issues in China, it was in some ways a very important moment for women, that conference in Beijing. And I think I wanted to come back to something you said, Bopha, because the issue of having it all, you know, when women say they want to have it all, what do they mean? What do we mean? We mean that we want to sort of have a kind of a normal life. We would like to have children, and we would like to have a career, we would like to have professional stimulation and camaraderie and make a contribution. But the very idea that one should have to choose, I think, is so appalling. Because if we were 4 men sitting here, 4 male journalists, nobody would say to you, how are you going to choose? Do you feel you can have it all? Do you feel you can have children and a career? Well, the question simply wouldn't arise. And there may be some, physiological reasons for that, and that men don't actually carry and birth children. But the point is that I don't think it's that women need to change to suit society. I think society needs to change to suit women, because we have a very unique and powerful contribution.
The newspapers or the media need to change to encourage women to be more active in the industry.
I think a lot of things need to change. On a very practical level, where to begin? There are so many issues. I think it's not just media, it's everything. On a personal level, I have 2 children, and one of the really crucial issues is work-life balance. We get back to it. Journalism, in some ways, is could be seen, some types of journalism could be seen as quite hostile to that, because it's other directed, things happen, you have to respond. If your kid is sick or there's something going on, your child's graduating, whatever, how do you choose? You could say, well, look to your husband to fill in, but maybe he's busy too. So, then who minds the kids? Okay, so the conservative response would be, again, this means that women aren't suited to these kinds of jobs. But I think that's fundamentally wrong. And the reason I think that's fundamentally wrong is because I think that we do have a very different life experience and a very important message for the world. One thing I'd like to say is I think that there's a great feminine or female energy, if you like, kind of building in the world right now. I think there's a really unique moment. Interest in this issue is growing in many places. The Female Factor, which was started by Alison Smale in Paris some years ago as a wonderful series, I think really caught that moment and took it further. There were other people who did it, and I think that was a terrific thing to do.
Thank you. Now, Kate is, you have a unique beat. You're covering the gambling industry worldwide. When we think of gambling, we think of the casinos, right? It's casinos, is money laundering, is the organized crime, the sleaze, right?
Leading question.
Tell us, how do you cover the beat as a woman journalist?
So that, you can hear me, okay. So you're talking about the perfect beat, right? This beat is so crazy, and I really love all the colorful situations I found myself in. I was thinking back to some of these bizarre events I've attended in the name of the Wall Street Journal of publications. I covered the launch of the Playboy Club at the Sands Macau, and I interviewed Bunny Tiffany for WGA.com. And the other weekend, I was at a bachelorette party where the sushi dinner was served on a van. And it's just, I don't know, I've done interviews at the best sandwich shop in Macau, which happens to overlook a
performance, and to the credit of the people I'm interviewing, they don't even bat an eye, right? They're just so used to it, that's their industry. So there's never a dull moment. And also there are so many combative personalities in this industry, so many larger-than-life casino bosses. Recently I was interviewing this guy who runs the lobby group for the US casino industry. So he's paid to basically say nice things about the casinos, but in a very, very short interview, he managed to compare these companies to both snipers who were trying to assassinate each other and also gladiators who were willing to fight to the death and, you know, conquer all in the Colosseum. So after this, you know, I was so excited. I was like, oh, these quotes are great. And my editor actually deleted the gladiator quote. And I was like, hey, come on, like, this is a great quote. And he was like, oh, it's too hard to follow. I was like, oh, come on. And then I realized, well, it is the casino industry, so I'm sure I'm going to have another quote like this, like, quite soon. And he said, yeah, probably next week. So there's that. And then I guess I was thinking back to another experience where I was doing an investigative piece, a more serious piece, on a casino company, and I knew that the head of the company was going to be in Macau for the AGM. So I thought, oh, this is a good time to kind of ask all my pesky questions. And I kept asking the company to commit to giving me an interview after this meeting. And they were non-committal, they were like, oh, maybe, I don't know. And it got to the point where I was actually about to leave Macau and go back to Hong Kong, and they said, oh, actually, I guess he can see you. And then I went to this lunch that was clearly planned well in advance. This boss was there with his wife, several bodyguards, board members, and their two top lawyers. And they were just kind of, you know, just looking at me, just giving me so many reasons why my story was not a story. This is not interesting. Why do you want to write about this?
So being a woman reporter, does it help? Does it not help, or does it matter at all?
I don't know, it's kind of tough to know, honestly. I mean, I don't feel like I've ever, I don't feel that it's ever hindered me being a woman. I mean, maybe it's helped even, I don't know. But there was an incident at one point early on in my career. I just started the Beech. I was only 26 years old, and I had gotten an interview with a very senior casino executive, and I was meeting him at this hotel, and at one point during this interview, he made a pass at me. And I was like, oh my God, what are you doing? And ran out of this meeting. I ran into an elevator, and he followed me into the elevator. And I mean, it's funny now because I've encountered so many crazy things, but during those few seconds in the elevator with this guy, I was terrified. I just had no idea what his intentions were, why he wouldn't just let me leave. Obviously, this wasn't going to work out with us. And afterward, I talked to my manager about it. He was very supportive. He said, you know, whatever you want to do. But kind of looking back, I wish that there had been some sort of training course, you know, for young women in particular who enter this field, because it's by no means just an issue with the casino industry. I mean, so many times where, you know, women journalists are interviewing men who are much older and who are in positions of power, whether that be the tech world, you know, finance, politics, whatever. And so I really think it would be useful if we could have a course like that. And actually, we're working on something like that at the Wall Street Journal right now.
I think that the positive side to that is that, generally speaking, older Asian men in particular terribly underestimate women journalists. And they have this ability to say things to women journalists they might not to men because they don't think that they're going to do something with it. I was in Afghanistan shortly after September 11th and traveling in an area where the Taliban and Northern Alliance were sort of fighting over the front was moving constantly, talking to warlords who were shifting alliances daily, and I ended up meeting this warlord who was quite conservative. And I was wearing a headscarf, but he really wanted me in a burqa. And the only way that he would talk to me was through another male journalist from a different publication who's sitting next to me. So we went from the warlord to our Dari translator to the Albany, New York newspaper journalist to me. I mean, it was a game of Afghan whispers. We're going back and forth and back and forth. And finally he says, very suggestively, my third wife position is open. So this gets translated from Shamsuddin, the Dari translator, to the Albany news guy who looks to me. And I said, well, actually, I'm engaged at the time. This message goes back, and the question that returns is, how many camels does he have? And my husband is an American journalist. He owns not a single camel. So this was shocking news to the warlord. And then he asks how many Kalashnikovs. Again, American journalists, not many Kalashnikovs. So that this idea of floating this third wife position was mentioned and gracefully declined through the kind of Afghan whispers movement back to the warlord. And later I found out from a translator that the circumstances under which the third wife had died were not necessarily conducive to marry him. But a couple days later, I was working on a story about women in Afghanistan, and I suddenly noticed that as one of the few female correspondents in the region, I could actually go and talk to female Afghans, as long as I found a female Afghan translator. And then suddenly you get this entree into a world which is vibrant and wonderful and warm. And that's the positive side of being a woman in these situations, because you get past to a certain extent for being a foreign woman, but then you're able to encounter stories that you really can't as a man.
Thank you. You want to add something, and then we'll open up to the floor. Prepare your questions.
I think that it's really hard, being a female journalist. For example, the country like Cambodia, that we compare to our neighboring countries, we might be developed. So maybe because we like a female journalist. So yeah, I think it helps. And all the women should keep doing the job as journalists. So because it's hard, it's really hard. Even the pressure from your family, friends, society. I think time passed by, more journalists are going to be in the world, so maybe one day there are going to be an organization of, promoting men's rights instead of women's rights.
Just to add very quickly to that, I have a lot of Burmese journalist friends that have been spending a lot of time in Burma or Myanmar. Time still calls it Burma for some reason. And there are a lot of female journalists in Myanmar. And I asked a friend who's an editor, I said, well, why is this? You've got really great young Burmese journalists who are women who are in training. And he basically said that journalism is looked down on as such a sort of lowly career that really it's okay to send your women to do that job.
Can I just briefly add, I think that has been the case in Hong Kong, even when I was, here many years ago working on newspapers, that there were a lot of very young women as journalists, but they men were more serious after that, and women perhaps stuck with it a bit longer. But I also wanted to say on the advantages, I think there are some advantages that one can be underestimated, and that could be quite useful, but I think that's a double-edged sword, because it can flip into a kind of some habits of exclusion and also be patronized. And I think so it's kind of it's a tricky one to negotiate, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add something a little bit? Yes. Actually, it could be a benefit, as you are a female journalist, and especially when you're young, people tend to talk to you and tend to give you information, but then when you write kind of impact stories, and they know your name, you end up having the same problem like male journalists.
Very true, very true. I think we'll open up to the floor and take some questions. Can you raise your hand if you have a question? We'll bring the mic to you. Identify yourself, explain.
Oh, my name is Karen. I'm a former journalist, and I crossed to the evil side of marketing. I was just curious because the first award tonight was for excellence in women's issues, and it seemed that two of the two winners, were both men. I wondered how that made our panelists feel.
Anyone want to take that question?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we should have a excellence male journalism award.
Yes.
And what would that even look like? There's a very famous saying that the fish never discovered water. So, when people take things very much for granted, they simply don't see their environment, and I think that that's what's going on here. But that's an interesting question that's worth thinking about, I think.
Question over there? The gentleman over there? Yes.
So, thank you, Adam Ashburn from Wall Street Journal. You're all extremely accomplished, but one of your executives, don't you think the best way to change a profession like this is to have more women at the helm of media organizations and in boardrooms?
You're rubbing it in. Anyone want to do it?
Nash, thanks a lot. If you want to make me an executive, I'm here. I mean, of course, yeah, that's so important. We need more women at the senior level, and as has been mentioned on this panel, in many cases there are a lot of women among the rank and file journalists, but as you get more and more senior at these companies, we're seeing fewer and fewer women. But that's not just a problem in journalism, that's in almost every industry I can think of, even politics. So I don't know, I feel like that's such a large question for society in general. But I think right now in journalism, at least in this tiny little patch that I know even less about, that we can start with really training up and encouraging younger journalists, because they're the ones who we hope will take these leadership positions in the future. And this is why, I've been talking with Paul about doing more programs that encourage people.
Right, I think that Sheryl Sandberg's answer to that would be that women need to lean in. I think that that's only part of the issue. I think that women lean in quite a lot. Whether or not you get anywhere after leaning in is a different question. And I think that there are also styles of communicating and which can be quite specific. And I think that there's also the question of how comfortable one is in certain circles, and ultimately whether one feels that it's worthwhile to try and break through that glass ceiling. And when you get there, perhaps you'll be on the glass slide. That's a phenomenon that's been noted about women who make it to high position, that they tend to get thrown out quite quickly too. Why that is, I don't know. I think that there's a general sense that when you're doing something new, there are a lot of victims involved, and you sacrifice a lot when you're somebody new doing something new, when you're breaking those barriers. But these, I would agree that this is a society-wide issue. It's in every profession.
There's a question here.
I'm Sue Thompson from the Women's Foundation. So one of the things that we're doing at the Foundation is we're making a documentary on the way that media, whether it's news reporting or advertising, whether it's music videos or video games, whether it's Disney soaps, Disney cartoons or soaps, or the selfies that young girls are taking themselves, the way that all of this objectifies women, puts them, very often depicts, particularly music videos and video games, depicts them quite violent, demeaning situations, and objectifies women. So, and creates exacerbates stereotypes. So I'd like to ask our distinguished panel what advice you have for us if we want to make a documentary, if we want to create a film which uses inspired proportion, right, as a platform for advocacy.
I think each of the panelists would make great characters in your film. Anna, you want to take on? Anyone want to take on the question?
I think the reality, no matter how palatable it is, even with political leaders, also she is a great example. If she were not beautiful, if she did not have fragrant flowers in her hair, if she did not have a famous father who is the head of the Burmese modern army who helped kick out the British and bring upon Burmese independence, she would be nothing. And that doesn't negate her ability, but it's a springboard for her success. And I think that is a reality that we just cannot ignore.
No, I think you just have to get women to tell their own stories. And this sort of takes me to the point, rather than women being objectified and often highly sexualized in the media. I think that's true. I mean, I live in Beijing and have done now this time for 10.5 years. And you know, you go online in any one day, and even people's daily, you know, the site is full of women like heaving breasts and sort of, you know, half naked and being thrown to the floor. And I mean, it's like, you know, okay. And this objectification and sexualization is a huge issue in the media, but we've known that for a long time. You just have to get women to tell their own stories. And this sort of brings me to a point that I did want to make, that I do think there's a huge difference between just being a woman in journalism and being a woman in journalism, or being anyone in journalism, in fact, could be a guy as well, who actually actively seeks to highlight and advocate, if you like, for gender issues. I think there's a profound difference there. And I think that when you start to do that, that you come across, you really start to bump up against some of these issues. But I do wish that a lot of women would tell their own stories more bravely, if you like, and actually really insist on that gender point of view, on that female point of view, and not just kind of try to outguy the guys, because one does see a lot of that.
If I could tell a personal story. My first son was born in 2007, and I think at the time I was the only female Phorn bureau chief. And I went to New York, and it was early in the pregnancy, but I don't get to New York very often, so I was telling my bosses, and people were very supportive. Most people were very supportive. And I said, look, what's the maternity leave policy? My headquarters are based in New York. I have bosses in Hong Kong. I was living in Bangkok at the time. You know, which law do I apply? So the HR department went back and they did a little research. And the response that came back in 2007 was that they had, in living memory, had no female foreign correspondent who would give birth. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem.
So you make history.
Well, I think the maternity leave policy for time. And Didi thinks that she has two kids. I think we're both very lucky in that we are both married to journalists who get the metabolism of our jobs. They understand that sometimes for a news-breaking event we have to disappear for a few days or a few weeks. But we're very lucky to have that kind of empathy at home, which many women don't have, particularly within this field.
So, we mean that both of you for husband is a journalist.
So after listening to their stories, I think these two ladies are lucky that they have very good husband, and the husbands, beside looking after the children, they also understand their job, because her husband is a journalist, sure, so he understands how hard the job is. Maybe you end up with somebody else, I'm not sure if it's still the same.
Well, I don't want to give too much away, but I don't think that, even when one has a husband who's terribly understanding, as mine very likely is, that things are always, quite so easy to negotiate, shall we say, because there are competing demands, and then ultimately women do bear the lion's share of childcare, and on an emotional level, there are very different things going on. And this sort of brings me back to the point that it's not just about being a woman doing, fitting into the guy's world. It's actually about seizing that world and saying, let's just turn things around here a little bit and start to highlight some of these crucially important issues. I mean, issues like violence, which goes,
unfixed. I mean, I could go on. There are many, many details. In China now, we're seeing a rollback on many fronts of, average incomes for women are dropping, employment rates are dropping. There are a lot of very serious issues which are completely not taken seriously by society at large. And again, it's a question of sort of saying, actually, you know what, this isn't just a small issue. This is actually 50% of the world's population who are directly affected by these things, one way or the other, at some point or another in their lives.
Thank you. Any more questions out there from younger journalists, women journalists? Oh, okay.
Hi, this might be covering the same ground that you just mentioned. I did a lot of talking about Hong Kong, and I haven't been in this industry for very long, but I was wondering, for you, if you have ever faced any limitations with regard to professional recognition and, more controversially, financial recognition.
You mean if they got recognized financially?
Yes, on the equal level with men.
That's right.
Yeah, getting paid like the same level as men in the workplace.
Okay. Just asking about pay equity. Is that an issue?
I think one of the problems with that is we don't know. There's not a lot of transparency in wages in this field in particular, and a lot of the roles that people have, people don't, it's kind of a flat organization in a sense, I think, at many companies where everyone has the title of reporter. So you could be a reporter for 20 years and be the most valuable person ever, or you could have just started the year before and, while you've been working for 20 years, you're kind of the one in charge of negotiating your salary, and if you're not very aggressive and if you don't really push, you might get shortchanged. So I don't know, I actually do wish there were more transparency, but I'm sure that in many industries, employers don't really want to give you too much information because then they are companies after all and need to make money for shareholders.
I will say that I think in general, we stereotype that women are probably less likely to ask for a raise than men are. And just talking anecdotally with my friends, that's certainly more around.
I think also, I would agree with that to some extent, but I think that women also, when they do ask for a raise, may actually be less likely to get one in many situations. And I think that's a very complex issue. I would totally agree with you. This issue of the lack of transparency in the workplace actually can work against women very strongly, because how are you supposed to find out what's normal? And you can come into a situation and think it's great, but it's actually not. And in fact, one of the earliest jobs I had here, which was a zillion years ago, the Eastern Express, here in Hong Kong, when it was part of the ODN group, I found out to my enormous chagrin that I was earning far, far less than equivalent male colleagues on the desk that I was on, and I had no idea. I only found out later, and they certainly weren't going to share that information with me. So employees don't want to tell you, but colleagues don't really want to tell you either.
Well, since it's getting quite personal, it's an important issue, so maybe it's time to wrap this up. But I think with this brief discussion, we've raised items for action for the entire year, in terms of policy issues, in terms of policies at the media organizations. That we need more transparency. It would be good to have policies that's more supportive of maternity leave issues. But also women are doing great. And our panel is a testimony to that. So please give our panelists a hand. Thank you.